The morning mist clung to the Afghan valley like a gray shroud as Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison adjusted his night vision goggles one final time. The Special Operations Command had been tracking a high-value target for 3 weeks, and tonight's mission would either end in success or disaster. Morrison's team of 8 Navy SEALs had infiltrated the remote mountain region under cover of darkness. Their objective clear: capture or eliminate Khalil Rahman, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks on coalition forces. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos crouched behind a rocky outcrop 2 kilometers away, her Barrett M82 sniper rifle trained on the valley below. As the team's designated marksman, she had earned her position through years of precise shooting and unwavering dedication. Her spotter, Corporal David Chen, lay beside her with powerful binoculars, scanning the terrain for any signs of enemy movement. The weight of responsibility pressed on her shoulders as she knew her teammates' lives depended on her accuracy. The target compound sat nestled against the mountainside, a cluster of mud brick buildings connected by narrow pathways. Intelligence reports indicated Rahman would be meeting with local tribal leaders to discuss weapon shipments from across the border. Morrison's team had positioned themselves strategically around the compound, each man knowing his role in the carefully orchestrated operation. The plan seemed straightforward: wait for confirmation of the target's presence, then move in swiftly and silently. As dawn approached, the team received word that Rahman had indeed arrived at the compound. Morrison signaled his men to begin their approach, moving like shadows across the rocky terrain. The operation required split-second timing and absolute precision. Each SEAL carried specialized equipment tailored for close-quarters combat, from suppressed weapons to breaching charges. Their years of training had prepared them for exactly this type of mission. Santos maintained her overwatch position, her rifle scope providing a clear view of the compound's main entrance. Through her earpiece, she could hear Morrison's team communicating in hushed tones as they closed in on their objective. The morning air was crisp and still, perfect conditions for long-range shooting if the situation demanded it. She controlled her breathing, keeping her heart rate steady as she had been trained to do during countless hours on the range. The first sign of trouble came when Chen spotted movement on the rooftops surrounding the compound. Armed men were taking defensive positions, their weapons glinting in the early morning light. It appeared the Taliban had been expecting visitors. Morrison's voice crackled through the radio, reporting that his team had encountered unexpected resistance at the compound's perimeter. What should have been a quiet infiltration was rapidly turning into a firefight. Gunfire erupted across the valley as Morrison's team found themselves pinned down by enemy forces. The Taliban fighters had prepared an ambush, using the compound's elevated position to their advantage. Santos could see muzzle flashes from multiple locations as her teammates sought cover behind whatever protection they could find. The carefully planned operation was falling apart, and her friends were in immediate danger. Morrison's team had advanced too far into the kill zone to retreat safely. The narrow mountain paths that had provided concealment during their approach now became death traps as enemy fighters poured automatic weapons fire down from elevated positions. The SEALs returned fire with disciplined bursts, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. Their only hope lay in the skills they had honed through years of training and the support of their Overwatch team. Santos adjusted her scope settings as she identified priority targets among the enemy fighters. Her training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, to focus on her breathing and trust in her equipment. Each shot she fired could mean the difference between life and death for her teammates trapped below. The weight of the rifle felt familiar in her hands as she prepared to engage targets at extreme range. The radio chatter became increasingly urgent as Morrison reported casualties among his team. They needed immediate support to break contact with the enemy and extract from their precarious position. Santos knew that her marksmanship skills would be tested to their absolute limits in the coming minutes. The lives of 8 brave men depended on her ability to provide accurate suppressing fire from her distant position. Chen fed her range estimates and wind readings as she tracked the enemy fighters moving between positions. The distance was at the very edge of her rifle's effective range, requiring her to account for bullet drop and atmospheric conditions. Every variable had to be calculated perfectly for her shots to find their marks. The morning sun was beginning to rise, creating shifting shadows that could either help or hinder her targeting efforts. As the firefight intensified, Santos realized that this mission would push every member of the team beyond their limits. The Taliban fighters seemed well prepared and determined to prevent the Americans from escaping. Her teammates' voices over the radio reflected the desperate nature of their situation as they fought for their lives in the valley below. The sound of AK-47 fire echoed off the canyon walls as Morrison's team scrambled for better cover. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rodriguez had taken a bullet to his shoulder, but continued fighting despite the pain. The team medic, Hospital Corpsman Second Class Tommy Walsh, crawled across open ground under heavy fire to reach the wounded SEAL. Blood stained the rocky ground as Walsh worked quickly to stop the bleeding and stabilize Rodriguez for what was likely to be a long and dangerous extraction. From her elevated position, Santos could see that her teammates were trapped in a horseshoe-shaped ambush. Taliban fighters occupied positions on 3 sides of the compound, creating overlapping fields of fire that made movement nearly impossible. The enemy had clearly studied American tactics and prepared their defenses accordingly. Morrison's team found themselves caught in a textbook kill zone with limited options for escape. The team's communications specialist, Petty Officer Second Class Kevin Park, struggled to maintain contact with their forward operating base while keeping his head down. Enemy bullets struck the rocks around him, sending sharp fragments flying in all directions. His radio equipment had been damaged by shrapnel, making it difficult to coordinate air support or extraction assets. The team was essentially on their own until they could establish reliable communications with higher command. Santos steadied her breathing as she acquired her first target through the rifle scope. An enemy fighter was moving between positions on a rooftop roughly 800 meters away. She calculated the wind speed and direction, adjusted for the steep downward angle, and slowly squeezed the trigger. The .50 caliber bullet crossed the valley in less than a second, striking the Taliban fighter center mass and removing him from the fight permanently. The suppressed gunshot was barely audible over the ongoing firefight, but Chen confirmed the hit through his spotting scope. Santos quickly worked the bolt action of her rifle and sought her next target. Every shot had to count because her position would eventually be compromised once the enemy figured out where the long-range fire was coming from. She had perhaps a few more minutes before Taliban fighters would start searching the surrounding ridgelines for her location. Morrison's voice came through the radio with increasing urgency as he reported that his team was running low on ammunition. They had brought enough supplies for a quick in-and-out operation, not an extended firefight against a numerically superior enemy force. Each SEAL carried approximately 200 rounds of rifle ammunition plus grenades and other specialized equipment, but that would not last long in a sustained engagement. The compound's layout worked against the trapped SEALs as the Taliban fighters used interior passages to move between firing positions without exposing themselves. Santos could see enemy muzzle flashes from windows and doorways, but the actual shooters remained hidden behind thick, mud brick walls. She needed to find targets that were exposed long enough for her to engage effectively at such extreme range. A group of Taliban reinforcements arrived at the compound aboard 2 pickup trucks, their weapons visible in the truck beds. Santos immediately shifted her aim toward the vehicles, knowing that eliminating the new arrivals would prevent the enemy from overwhelming Morrison's team through sheer numbers. Her second shot punched through the windshield of the lead truck, causing it to veer off the narrow mountain road and crash into a boulder. The surviving enemy fighters from the vehicles took cover behind the disabled trucks and began setting up a heavy machine gun. Santos realized that once that weapon became operational, her teammates would have no chance of survival. The .50 caliber machine gun would tear through their improvised cover like paper. She had to eliminate that threat before the enemy could bring it to bear on Morrison's position. Chen provided range and wind corrections as Santos lined up her most critical shot of the mission. The machine gunner was partially concealed behind the truck's engine block, presenting only a small target at maximum range. Environmental conditions were becoming more challenging as the morning sun created heat shimmer that could affect bullet trajectory. Everything had to be perfect for this shot to succeed. The crack of Santos's rifle echoed across the valley as her third round found its mark. The Taliban machine gunner collapsed behind his weapon, eliminating the immediate threat to her teammates below. However, other enemy fighters quickly moved to take his place, dragging the heavy weapon toward a more protected firing position. The temporary advantage Santos had created was already slipping away. Morrison's team attempted to break contact by moving toward a narrow ravine that might provide concealment for their withdrawal. However, Taliban fighters on the surrounding ridgelines had anticipated this move and positioned themselves to cut off the escape route. The SEALs found themselves caught between multiple enemy positions with nowhere to run. Their situation was becoming more desperate with each passing minute. Santos watched helplessly as enemy fighters closed in on her teammates' position from multiple directions. Her rifle was effective at long range, but she could not engage targets that were too close to friendly forces without risking fratricide. The rules of engagement required positive identification of threats, and in the chaos of close-quarters combat, such identification became nearly impossible from her distant overwatch position. The radio crackled with Morrison's increasingly strained voice as he called for immediate air support or extraction. Park had managed to repair his communications equipment enough to reach their base, but available aircraft were committed to other operations across the region. The team would have to hold their position for at least another hour before help could arrive. Given their current ammunition situation and the number of enemy fighters surrounding them, an hour might as well be an eternity. The situation deteriorated rapidly as Taliban fighters began using rocket-propelled grenades against Morrison's team. The first RPG struck a boulder near Petty Officer Second Class James Mitchell, the blast throwing him several feet and leaving him dazed with a concussion. The enemy was escalating their tactics, determined to overwhelm the trapped Americans through superior firepower and numbers. Santos felt frustration building as she watched her teammates take increasingly desperate measures to survive. Through her scope, she could see Morrison dragging Mitchell to safety while under heavy fire. The team leader's tactical vest showed tears from near misses, and his movement suggested he might have taken hits that he was not reporting over the radio. Pride and professionalism kept SEALs fighting even when seriously wounded. Chen spotted movement on a ridgeline across the valley, where several Taliban fighters were setting up what appeared to be a recoilless rifle. The weapon system would have devastating effects against her teammates' improvised fortifications. Santos swiveled her rifle toward the new threat, knowing that eliminating it was critical for keeping her friends alive. The range was nearly 900 meters with a significant crosswind that would affect bullet trajectory. The mathematics of long-range shooting filled Santos's mind as she calculated the required adjustments. Wind speed, temperature, humidity, altitude, and the Coriolis effect all influenced where her bullet would impact. Her training had drilled these calculations into muscle memory, but the extreme range pushed her skills to their absolute limits. One mistake in her computations would result in a complete miss and waste precious ammunition. Morrison's team had been pinned down for over 30 minutes, and their ammunition situation was becoming critical. Walsh had distributed medical supplies to treat Rodriguez's shoulder wound and Mitchell's concussion, but both men remained combat effective despite their injuries. The team's determination to survive and complete their mission drove them to continue fighting against overwhelming odds. Santos's fourth shot of the engagement struck one of the fighters manning the recoilless rifle, causing the weapon to tumble down the rocky slope. However, other enemy combatants quickly moved to recover the fallen weapon system. She realized that individual kills were not enough to break the enemy's resolve. She needed to find a way to create mass casualties or force a general withdrawal from their positions. The compound's ammunition storage building presented an opportunity that Santos had not previously considered. Intelligence reports indicated that the Taliban stored weapons and explosives in a concrete structure near the main building. A well-placed shot into the ammunition dump could create a massive explosion that would eliminate multiple enemy positions simultaneously. However, the target was extremely small at her current range. Chen confirmed the location of the storage building through his spotting scope and provided detailed measurements for Santos to work with. The building's ventilation openings offered the only vulnerable points for her rifle rounds to penetrate. She would need to thread the needle perfectly to ignite the stored ammunition and explosives inside. The margin for error was essentially zero at such extreme range. Morrison's voice over the radio indicated that his team was preparing for a final breakout attempt. They had consolidated their remaining ammunition and identified a potential escape route through a narrow canyon that led away from the compound. However, the route required crossing approximately 200 meters of open ground while under direct observation from enemy positions. Without suppressive fire, the movement would be suicide. Santos understood that her teammates were depending on her marksmanship to create the distraction they needed for their escape attempt. She had one opportunity to hit the ammunition storage building and create enough chaos to mask their movement. If she missed, Morrison's team would be cut down in the open ground with no cover or concealment available. The pressure of the moment seemed to slow time as Santos aligned her rifle scope with the small ventilation opening in the storage building. Every aspect of her training focused into this single moment where 8 lives hung in the balance. She controlled her breathing, let her heart rate settle, and began the final squeeze of the trigger that would determine the mission's outcome. Wind conditions had shifted slightly since her last shot, requiring minor adjustments to her point of aim. Chen provided continuous updates on environmental factors as Santos held her rifle steady against the bipod. The weight of the Barrett rifle felt reassuring in her hands as she trusted in the equipment that had never failed her during training or previous deployments. The sound of automatic weapons fire from the valley below created a constant background noise that Santos had learned to filter out during her years of combat experience. Her world narrowed to the precise relationship between her rifle scope's crosshairs and the small target nearly a kilometer away. Everything else became irrelevant as she focused on the fundamentals of marksmanship that had been drilled into her through countless hours of practice. Morrison's team began their movement across the open ground, counting on Santos to deliver the suppressive fire they desperately needed. The next few seconds would determine whether they escaped to fight another day or joined the ranks of fallen warriors who had given their lives in service to their country. Santos held her breath and made the final trigger adjustment that would unleash devastation on the enemy compound. The .50 caliber bullet traveled across the valley in a perfect arc, striking the ammunition storage building's ventilation opening with surgical precision. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the entire compound erupted in a massive fireball that lit up the morning sky like a miniature sun. Secondary explosions followed as stored rockets and grenades detonated in a chain reaction that shook the mountainside. The explosion's shockwave reached Santos and Chen's position several seconds later, followed by the thunderous roar that echoed off the canyon walls. Debris rained down on the compound as the storage building collapsed into a smoking crater. Taliban fighters who had survived the initial blast stumbled away from their positions, many of them wounded and disoriented by the unexpected devastation. Morrison seized the opportunity created by Santos's perfect shot. His team bounded across the open ground in tactical formation, each man covering his teammates as they moved toward the canyon entrance. The explosion had eliminated at least half of the enemy fighters and sent the survivors scrambling for safety. For the first time since the ambush began, the SEALs had gained the initiative. Rodriguez fought through the pain in his wounded shoulder as he provided covering fire for his teammates' movement. His M4 carbine bucked against his good shoulder as he sent precise bursts toward any enemy position that showed signs of life. The team medic Walsh stayed close to Rodriguez, ready to provide immediate medical attention if the wound reopened during the strenuous movement across rough terrain. The canyon entrance offered the first real cover Morrison's team had seen since the firefight began. Steep rock walls would protect them from direct fire and provide multiple defensive positions if the enemy attempted to pursue. However, the narrow passage could also become a death trap if Taliban fighters managed to block the exit or call in reinforcements to surround the canyon. Santos maintained her overwatch position as she scanned for surviving enemy fighters who might threaten her teammates' withdrawal. Through her scope, she could see several Taliban combatants regrouping near the compound's outer perimeter. They appeared to be organizing a pursuit of the escaping Americans, gathering weapons and ammunition from the undamaged portions of the facility. Chen spotted a group of enemy fighters attempting to flank Morrison's team by moving along a parallel ridgeline. The Taliban unit consisted of approximately 6 men armed with assault rifles and at least one rocket-propelled grenade launcher. If they reached the canyon's exit before the SEALs could clear the passage, they would be in perfect position to ambush the entire team. Santos shifted her aim toward the flanking force, knowing that eliminating this threat was critical for her teammates' successful escape. The range was slightly shorter than her previous shots, but the targets were moving across broken ground that made precise shooting more challenging. She would need to lead her targets and account for their movement patterns to achieve effective hits. Her 5th shot of the engagement caught the lead Taliban fighter in mid-stride, dropping him instantly and causing his companions to seek cover among the rocks. However, the remaining fighters continued their movement toward the canyon exit using terrain features to mask their approach. Santos realized she would need to engage multiple targets in rapid succession to prevent them from completing their flanking maneuver. Morrison's team made good progress through the canyon, but the narrow confines slowed their movement considerably. Mitchell was still feeling the effects of his concussion, requiring assistance from his teammates to navigate the rocky terrain safely. Park carried the team's communications equipment while maintaining contact with their forward operating base, providing regular updates on their tactical situation. The Taliban fighters pursuing Morrison's team had reorganized more quickly than expected. Santos could see them moving through the compound's ruins, searching for weapons and ammunition that had survived the explosion. Their determination to capture or kill the American Special Operations Forces was evident in their rapid response to the devastating setback they had just suffered. Santos engaged the flanking force with rapid, precise shots that forced them to abandon their movement toward the canyon exit. Her 6th and 7th rounds struck within meters of the enemy fighters, sending rock fragments flying and convincing them to seek better cover. While she had not achieved direct hits on all targets, the suppressive fire was effectively delaying their advance. The canyon passage stretched for nearly a kilometer before opening into a wider valley where extraction helicopters could potentially land. Morrison pushed his team forward at maximum speed, knowing that every minute they remained in the area increased the likelihood of encountering additional enemy forces. The Taliban had extensive networks in this region and could call upon reinforcements from multiple directions. Walsh monitored Rodriguez's condition as they moved through the canyon, checking for signs of increased bleeding or shock. The wounded SEAL maintained his fighting spirit despite the pain, refusing to slow down his teammates' progress toward safety. His determination exemplified the warrior ethos that drove special operations forces to overcome seemingly impossible odds. Santos prepared to displace from her overwatch position as her teammates neared the canyon's exit. Remaining too long in one location would allow the enemy to triangulate her position and direct fire toward her hiding spot. She and Chen needed to begin their own movement toward the extraction point while maintaining the ability to provide long-range support if needed. The sound of helicopter rotors in the distance indicated that extraction assets were finally approaching the area. Morrison's voice over the radio confirmed that their communications with the forward operating base had been successful in coordinating air support. However, the helicopters would need a secure landing zone, and Taliban forces in the area would certainly attempt to interfere with the extraction operation. The extraction helicopters faced immediate threats as they approached the landing zone. Taliban fighters throughout the region had heard the explosions and were converging on the area with portable surface-to-air missiles. The helicopter pilots would need to execute their landing and pick up under extremely dangerous conditions while enemy forces attempted to shoot them down with shoulder-fired weapons. Morrison's team reached the canyon exit and immediately began establishing a defensive perimeter around the designated landing zone. The open valley floor provided good visibility but offered limited cover from enemy fire. Each SEAL took position behind whatever natural protection they could find, while scanning for approaching threats from multiple directions. Santos and Chen began their movement down from the overwatch position, carefully navigating the steep mountainside, while maintaining visual contact with the extraction site. Santos carried her Barrett rifle and additional ammunition, knowing that she might need to provide sniper support during the helicopter pickup. The weight of her equipment made the descent treacherous on the loose rock and narrow ledges. The distinctive sound of AK-47 fire echoed from the ridgeline surrounding the valley as Taliban reinforcements opened fire on the approaching helicopters. Green tracer rounds streaked across the sky as enemy fighters tried to bring down the aircraft before they could land. The helicopter pilots maneuvered aggressively to avoid the incoming fire while maintaining their approach to the landing zone. Rodriguez's shoulder wound had begun bleeding again during the movement through the canyon, leaving a trail of blood drops on the rocky ground. Walsh quickly applied fresh bandages and administered pain medication to keep the wounded SEAL functional during the extraction. The team could not afford to have any member become a liability during this critical phase of the operation. The lead helicopter touched down in the center of the valley, its rotors kicking up clouds of dust and debris that provided some concealment from enemy observation. Morrison's team bounded toward the aircraft in pairs, with each SEAL covering his partner's movement across the open ground. The pilots kept their engines running, ready to lift off immediately once all personnel were aboard. Santos reached a position where she could observe the entire valley floor and surrounding ridgelines. Through her scope, she spotted a Taliban fighter preparing to fire a rocket-propelled grenade at the landed helicopter. The range was approximately 600 meters, well within her rifle's effective capability, but she would need to make the shot quickly before the enemy could complete his attack. Her 8th shot of the mission struck the RPG gunner just as he was raising his weapon to fire. The rocket launcher tumbled down the mountainside as its operator collapsed, eliminating an immediate threat to the extraction helicopter. However, Santos could see other enemy fighters moving into position with similar weapons, creating multiple threats that she could not engage simultaneously. Chen identified additional targets for Santos to engage, while monitoring the team's progress toward the helicopter. Mitchell was still experiencing balance problems from his concussion, requiring assistance from Park to reach the aircraft safely. The team was moving as quickly as possible, but the combination of wounded personnel and hostile fire was slowing their extraction. The second helicopter circled overhead, providing suppressive fire with its door-mounted machine guns against enemy positions on the surrounding ridgelines. The aircraft's gunners engaged Taliban fighters who were attempting to set up heavy weapons that could threaten the extraction operation. Spent brass casings fell like rain around the landing zone as the helicopter's weapon systems worked to suppress enemy fire. Santos acquired another target as a Taliban sniper took position on a rocky outcrop overlooking the valley. The enemy marksman was setting up for a shot at the helicopter crew or the SEALs still moving across open ground. She calculated the range at roughly 700 meters with a moderate crosswind that required compensation in her point of aim. Her 9th round found its mark, eliminating the enemy sniper before he could engage friendly forces. The precision shooting was taking its toll on enemy morale, as Taliban fighters began to realize that their positions were being systematically eliminated by an unseen marksman. Some enemy combatants abandoned their weapons and fled toward deeper cover in the mountains. Morrison's team reached the helicopter and began boarding while maintaining security around the aircraft. The pilots were eager to depart as enemy fire intensified from multiple directions. Bullet holes appeared in the helicopter's fuselage as Taliban fighters concentrated their fire on the stationary aircraft, trying to disable it before the Americans could escape. Santos and Chen were still moving down the mountainside when they spotted a large group of Taliban reinforcements approaching the valley from the north. The enemy force consisted of approximately 20 fighters aboard 4 vehicles, including at least one technical truck mounting a heavy machine gun. If this force reached the valley before the helicopters could depart, they would overwhelm the extraction operation. The distance to the approaching vehicles was nearly 1,000 meters. At the absolute maximum range of Santos's rifle system, she would need to achieve hits on moving targets at extreme range, while accounting for the vehicle's speed and direction of travel. The mathematical calculations required for such shots pushed beyond normal sniper training into the realm of extraordinary marksmanship. Chen provided range estimates and target movement analysis as Santos prepared for the most challenging shots of her career. The approaching vehicles were moving at approximately 30 miles per hour across rough terrain, making precise target prediction extremely difficult. She would need to lead her targets by several meters to account for bullet flight time and vehicle movement. The first helicopter lifted off with Morrison's team aboard, but the second aircraft needed to pick up Santos and Chen before the enemy reinforcements could reach the valley. The pilots coordinated their movements to minimize exposure time, while ensuring that all personnel could be evacuated safely. The sound of the helicopter rotors provided an urgent soundtrack to the race against time, playing out on the mountainside below. Santos steadied herself against a large boulder as she prepared to engage the approaching vehicle convoy at maximum range. The technical truck with the mounted machine gun posed the greatest threat to the extraction helicopter, and eliminating it would significantly reduce the enemy's capability to interfere with the pickup operation. She had perhaps 2 minutes before the vehicles reached effective firing range. The mathematical precision required for such an extreme shot demanded every ounce of Santos's training and experience. She calculated bullet drop, wind drift, and target lead time while accounting for the vehicle's bouncing movement across the uneven terrain. The margin for error was measured in inches at a range where most snipers would not even attempt to engage. Chen provided continuous updates on vehicle speed and direction as Santos tracked the lead truck through her scope. The enemy fighters aboard the vehicles were clearly visible, their weapons ready for immediate action once they reached the valley floor. The heavy machine gun on the technical truck was already manned and could deliver devastating fire against the helicopter once it came within range. Santos controlled her breathing and heart rate as she had been trained to do during high-stress shooting situations. The rifle felt solid and familiar in her hands despite the extreme range of the engagement. She led the moving target by approximately 8 meters and slowly squeezed the trigger, sending her 10th round of the mission toward the approaching convoy. The bullet's flight time across nearly 1,000 meters seemed to last forever. Santos watched through her scope as the .50 caliber round struck the technical truck's windshield, killing the driver instantly and causing the vehicle to veer off the narrow mountain road. The truck rolled down a steep embankment, taking its heavy machine gun and crew out of the fight permanently. The destruction of the lead vehicle caused confusion among the remaining enemy fighters, but they quickly reorganized and continued their advance toward the valley. Santos had eliminated their most dangerous weapon system, but the remaining vehicles still carried enough firepower to threaten the extraction operation. She needed to continue engaging targets to buy time for the helicopter pickup. The second helicopter descended toward the mountainside where Santos and Chen were positioned. But the aircraft could not land on the steep slope. The pilots would need to hover while the two-person sniper team rappelled down ropes to reach the helicopter's cabin. This evolution would leave them vulnerable to enemy fire for several critical minutes. Santos engaged the second vehicle in the convoy with her 11th shot, striking the engine block and disabling the truck before it could reach the valley floor. Steam and smoke poured from under the hood as the vehicle coasted to a stop, its passengers bailing out and seeking cover among the rocks. The enemy force was being systematically reduced, but time was running out. Chen prepared the repelling equipment, while Santos continued to provide covering fire against the remaining Taliban vehicles. The helicopter hovered approximately 50 feet above their position, its rotors creating downwash that made precision shooting more difficult. She had to compensate for the turbulent air while maintaining accuracy at extreme range. The extraction helicopter began taking small arms fire from enemy positions scattered throughout the surrounding mountains. Bullet strikes on the aircraft's fuselage created sparks and metallic pinging sounds that were audible even over the rotor noise. The pilots maintained their position despite the incoming fire, demonstrating the courage that characterized military aviation crews. Santos's 12th shot targeted an enemy fighter who was attempting to set up a rocket-propelled grenade launcher within range of the hovering helicopter. The round struck the Taliban fighter center mass, sending the RPG launcher tumbling into a ravine where it could not be recovered. Her precision shooting was systematically eliminating the enemy's most dangerous weapon systems. Chen clipped his rappelling gear to the rope and began his descent toward the helicopter's open door. The aircraft's crew chief assisted with the pickup operation, while the door gunner provided suppressive fire against enemy positions. Santos would follow once Chen was safely aboard the aircraft, but she needed to continue engaging threats until the last possible moment. The remaining enemy vehicles had reached the valley floor and were deploying their passengers to establish firing positions around the landing zone. Santos could see Taliban fighters setting up mortars and heavy machine guns that would make future helicopter operations in the area extremely dangerous. Her continued sniper fire was the only thing preventing them from completing their weapons emplacement. Santos's 13th and 14th shots struck enemy fighters attempting to man a heavy machine gun position near the valley entrance. The suppressive fire forced the Taliban team to abandon their weapon and seek cover, but other enemy combatants quickly moved to take their place. The enemy's determination to prevent the American escape was evident in their willingness to accept heavy casualties. Chen reached the helicopter safely and immediately began preparing the cabin for Santos's arrival. The aircraft's crew chief lowered a second rope for the sniper to use during her extraction. Santos would need to sling her rifle across her back and trust in her rappelling skills to reach safety, while enemy fighters concentrated their fire on her position. The sound of mortar rounds impacting near the helicopters position indicated that the enemy had successfully deployed their indirect fire weapons. The pilots maneuvered the aircraft to avoid the incoming rounds while maintaining position for Santos's pickup. Each mortar explosion sent shrapnel flying through the air, creating additional hazards for the extraction operation. Santos fired her 15th and final shot of the engagement, striking an enemy mortar crew member and disrupting their fire mission against the helicopter. She then slung her rifle across her back and clipped into the rappelling rope, beginning her descent toward the aircraft's open door. The weight of her equipment and the helicopter's downwash made the rappel more challenging than standard training exercises. Enemy bullets cracked past Santos as she descended the rope, but the helicopter's door gunner provided covering fire that forced the Taliban fighters to keep their heads down. The precision timing required for the extraction demonstrated the professionalism and skill that characterized Special Operations aviation units. Every crew member understood their role in ensuring that no American was left behind. Santos reached the helicopter's cabin just as another mortar round exploded nearby, sending shrapnel against the aircraft's armored hull. The crew chief pulled her inside while the door gunner continued to engage enemy positions with his mounted machine gun. The helicopter immediately began climbing away from the mountainside, gaining altitude and speed to escape the effective range of Taliban weapons. The flight back to the forward operating base gave Santos time to reflect on the morning's events. Her 15 precision shots had eliminated key enemy threats and enabled her teammates to escape from what could have been a fatal ambush. The Barrett rifle lay across her lap, still warm from the extended engagement that had pushed her marksmanship skills to their absolute limits. Chen reviewed the mission's events with Santos as the helicopter flew over the rugged Afghan landscape. The sniper team had provided overwatch for Morrison's team from their elevated position, engaging targets at ranges up to 1,000 meters in challenging environmental conditions. Their precision shooting had been the decisive factor in preventing enemy forces from overwhelming the trapped SEALs. The helicopter crew reported that Morrison's team had been successfully extracted without additional casualties beyond Rodriguez's shoulder wound and Mitchell's concussion. Both injured SEALs were receiving medical treatment aboard the lead helicopter and were expected to make full recoveries. The mission had achieved its primary objective of disrupting Taliban operations while bringing all personnel home safely. Intelligence. Analysts would later determine that Santos's shot into the ammunition storage facility had destroyed significant quantities of weapons and explosives intended for future attacks against coalition forces. The secondary explosions had eliminated approximately 30 enemy fighters and rendered the compound unusable for Taliban operations. The strategic impact of the mission extended far beyond the immediate tactical success. Morrison's after-action report praised Santos's exceptional marksmanship and tactical decision-making during the crisis. Her ability to engage targets at extreme range while accounting for complex environmental factors had saved the lives of 8 Navy SEALs. The mission demonstrated the critical importance of skilled sniper support in special operations environments. The forward operating base's medical facility treated Rodriguez's shoulder wound and monitored Mitchell for signs of serious head injury. Both SEALs would be returned to duty within a few weeks, their injuries serving as reminders of the dangers inherent in special operations missions. The team's successful extraction was attributed to superior training, equipment, and the unwavering support provided by their sniper overwatch. Santos underwent debriefing sessions with intelligence personnel who wanted detailed information about enemy tactics and weapons observed during the engagement. Her observations from the elevated position had provided valuable insights into Taliban defensive preparations and response procedures. This intelligence would inform future operations in the region. The mission's success led to recommendations for awards recognizing the exceptional performance of Santos and her teammates. Morrison's leadership under fire and Santos's precision shooting at extreme range exemplified the standards expected of Navy SEAL personnel. Their actions had upheld the special operations community's reputation for excellence in the most challenging circumstances. Rodriguez returned to full duty 6 weeks after the mission, his shoulder completely healed and his determination to serve unchanged. Mitchell also recovered from his concussion without lasting effects, though he would always remember the moment when Santos's sniper fire had created the distraction that saved their lives. The bonds forged during combat operations created lifelong connections among team members. The Taliban compound was never rebuilt after Santos's devastating shot destroyed the ammunition storage facility. Satellite imagery showed that the area remained abandoned months after the mission, with local residents avoiding the site due to unexploded ordnance scattered by the massive explosion. The psychological impact on enemy forces was as significant as the physical destruction. Santos continued serving as a sniper instructor after completing her deployment, passing her hard-earned knowledge to the next generation of military marksmen. Her experience during the bridge ambush became a case study in advanced sniper tactics taught at special operations schools. The lessons learned from her extreme-range shooting would benefit countless future warriors. Years later, Santos would look back on that morning in the Afghan mountains as the defining moment of her military career. 15 carefully aimed shots had turned the tide of a desperate battle and brought her teammates home safely. The weight of responsibility she had carried that day remained, with her as a reminder of the trust placed in special operations personnel. The mission demonstrated that individual skills and training could have strategic impact when applied at the critical moment. Santos's marksmanship had eliminated enemy threats, disrupted Taliban operations, and saved American lives. Her story became part of the proud tradition of Navy SEAL snipers who had served with distinction in conflicts around the world. The morning that began with a routine capture mission had ended with a harrowing escape that tested every aspect of the team's training and equipment. Santos's precision shooting at extreme range had provided the margin of victory in a situation where failure was not an option. Her 15 shots had cleared the path to survival for 8 brave men who lived to fight another day.